deadline day, and that means we got tons to break down. It's time for Inside Coverage. She's Jori Epstein. I'm Jason Fitz, hanging out with you. Frank Schwab gets the day off. Last I heard, he was in Vegas, so I'm not sure if we'll ever see him again. But this is what I know. I know he's having a good time, and that means that, Jori, you and I get to tag team today, and it's a big day because franchise tag deadline has now come and gone. But that's not without consequence to everybody across the board. We'll get into a bunch of it. But first, above and beyond all franchise tags, we got breaking news that had nothing to do with the player being franchised, but one Saquon Barkley. I was listening to the radio, sports talk radio at the gym, like I was getting all big and bulky, and all of a sudden I hear this breaking news. And I thought for sure it was going to be Sam Darnold signs a franchise tag or something happens. No, the breaking news today, Saquon Barkley is now the highest paid running back in NFL history with a massive $41.2 million extension. And I just keep thinking about last year on the offseason Hard Knocks that we watched where, you know, the Giants ownership, John Mara, was just sitting there saying, I don't want to see him play for somebody else. And now not only is he playing for somebody else, but he's getting rich for somebody else right after he won a Super Bowl ring. Like, things could not have gone better for the Eagles and Saquon. And this just has to be a massive kick in the no-no places to Giants fans today, Jori.
Yeah, good for Saquon Barkley and good for the Eagles. Saquon Barkley goes over 2,000 yards in the regular season. He's a key force in the playoffs. They win the Super Bowl, and now he's cashing in. At first, I was a little surprised of, hey, you're going to give him more money when he's still under contract a couple of years. And, oh, by the way, $20 million is more than any running back has ever averaged per year. Technically, it's in new money, not over the life of the 4 years of the deal. But I think when you look at it, you say, the San Francisco 49ers a couple years ago made a decision that the Philadelphia Eagles made last year, which is that the running back market was so depressed that if you find a truly special running back, not every running back, but a truly special one, especially if that running back has some sort of value in the pass game, or for Saquon Barkley, he's got so many home run threats that he might as well have it in terms of the efficiency of his runs relative to other passes, that you get them done. And then if they take you really far, you pay them. And so at first I was like, why are we giving him more money? But when I reached out to people in the team, they're saying, you know what? When you just sign them, and you might as well do it early. And if you're looking at the running back market, the running backs are so much cheaper right now than the receivers that if you can get a strong running back for a similar value to a receiver at half the price of a receiver, like literally pretty much half the price of some of these receivers and where that market is headed, then you get it done. And on top of that, the 49ers had extended Christian McCaffrey to a very similar deal in terms of how long was left on his deal, how much new money a year ago after their own Super Bowl run for about $19 million per year. So now you just say, okay, give you $1 more million per year. It's an easy structure. You have San Francisco setting the way last year. Let's do it. Let's move forward. And maybe you clear up cap space at some point if you want it.
The cap space portion of this, and look, we talked last week about how the cap space is sort of a mirage for a lot of these teams. But man, Jori, this has to be frustrating for NFL teams all over the league, the fans all over the league sort of looking at it and saying, well, you can't sign everybody, and then the Eagles do. Like, the Eagles managed to find a way to sign literally everybody at every turn, and they make it work. And we talked a lot about the greatness of Howie Roseman, but this just has to be frustrating for every other fan base right now that's sitting there saying, why can't my team figure out how to just get every great player they want and then re-sign every great player they want?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think part of this is because the Eagles do what they did now is none of us really thought that Saquon was getting this deal today. Why would you? As you mentioned, this was not a franchise tag question. He was under contract for 2 more years, still had guarantees left on his deal. But Howie Roseman said, I know I want this guy. He's great. Forget the injury history in the past, which again, the Eagles are taking some degree of risk because Saquon, the same way Christian McCaffrey with the Niners, has an injury history. But they believe that with their offensive line, they're going to get a level of value out of Saquon, and with Jalen Hurts as a mobile quarterback, I should say, that other teams aren't. They should go ahead and pay it. And oh, by the way, when you look at how this salary cap keeps going up and up, $20 million in 2 years when this deal really starts, the new money really starts, probably going to look like a steal.
Okay, so let me get something off my chest. Because to me, the signing of Saquon is incredible. But it doesn't mean that suddenly the way that we measure all running backs has to change. And I want to remind everybody that Saquon was very good with the Giants, and they didn't win any football games. I watched Josh Jacobs lead the league in rushing. The Raiders didn't win any football games. Derrick Henry is an incredible running back. The Titans didn't win any football games. To me, part of this is the team and the situation makes a lot of sense. Like, The ice cream toppings are great, but you got to have ice cream. And I think at some point, running backs are kind of like ice cream toppings. By themselves, they're not going to make the greatest dessert in the world. But when you put them on something that's already spectacular, it makes something spectacular even better. So I just want to press pause on this concept that everybody thinks, well, now this is resurgent. Running backs are about to take over again. No, I think what you have are very good teams that then sign very good running backs, and it looks brilliant when you do it that way.
Fitz, you said you weren't in Indianapolis, and I assume that you're not doing anything illegal, but it really feels like you were tapping some of my conversations from the Combine last week.
Amazing.
Because particularly one I had over the weekend with people inside the Giants organization, and I was talking to them, and they were having a conversation about how they feel like the media was unfair to them this year. And I was like, look, both with doing Hard Knocks and with getting rid of Saquon, I actually think that the arguments were defendable. It doesn't feel good. It's not fun. But Saquon was not going to have a 2,000-yard season with the Giants because they didn't have a quarterback. They didn't have an offensive line. And they had so many issues on that roster. And someone from the team responded and goes, so you're telling me he's a finishing piece and not a starter piece? I think that's probably a little bit far, but I do think that the value you're getting out of Saquon is different when he's the finishing piece than when he's the starter piece. Saquon will still excite your fans. Saquon will still have great plays, but no one at any position in the NFL can do this without a surrounding cast that is like usually at the average to good level. And the Giants just weren't there in their life cycle of their team. So you say toppings on ice cream. The Giants people I was talking to were saying starter versus finisher. I feel like all of you have that vertical imagery going on. And yes, we are all on the same page here that not only is it a different story for Saquon in terms of who should have him, I do not expect Saquon's money to mean that running backs around the league are about to get 18 to 20 million a year.
Yeah, to be clear, if Saquon rushes for 2,000 yards for the Giants, I don't think the Giants are suddenly in the Super Bowl. Like, Saquon rushed for 2,000 yards for a team that had a great offensive line, a really good quarterback, some great weapons on the outside, and a defense that played at a level that nobody saw coming. Like, okay, now he's one of the most important parts of a team that has a lot of really valuable parts. And that's why I think we have to press pause a little bit on some of this running back draft conversation, because Ashton Jeanty, certainly the highest regarded, let's say, most hyped prospect, deservedly so, out of Boise State, the running back. Amarian Hampton, another running back that people are in love with at North Carolina. These guys are, everybody's talking about them being, high first-round picks. I understand it. But also, if you're picking in the top 10 and you take Ashton Jeanty, you're not suddenly going to be a Super Bowl team. Like, what you're going to do is you're going to do what the Raiders, Giants, and Titans did. You're going to have a great running back on a team that sucks until that running back goes play somewhere else, and then he can become a finishing piece. Like, to me, you just have to be strategic. There's no one rule on what the value is or should be of a running back. I think the value of what a running back is wildly dependent on the team that you're putting him in if you're actually talking about wins and losses.
I think that's a great point, Fitz. And I think the difference between the value that teams are assigning to high draft picks at running back compared to the value in terms of what they want to pay guys on their second contracts or on a veteran contract is a different conversation. I think that running backs are going to be drafted. I think we're going to see multiple first-round picks. I think that we are getting back to an era where Jahmyr Gibbs going at 11 wouldn't be so crazy. But I think that's different than the guys on the second contract, because the conversation that people are having that I think Saquon has shown you can be an outlier for, but I still believe he's an outlier rather than a trend. That conversation is, what's the wear and tear for running backs, and where are they when they continue on in their career? Not, do you need a run game and do you need someone coming in the draft? And while a lot of people consider this to be a weaker class at quarterback and receiver, at running back and tight end, you feel better about it. And also that the depth at running back. And so I think that we will see a lot of teams whose running backs can really change, maybe not change their offense in the sense of go from a 4-win team to a 9-win team, but I do think running backs who can really break out on the scene very quickly as rookies.
Jori, that's where it gets interesting, because if you're a team like the Giants, picking incredibly high, and you've got a couple of weapons. I mean, I love the concept of the best player available. I don't want you to draft a quarterback just because you need one. If you're a team like the Raiders, I don't want you to draft a quarterback just because you need one. If Ashton Jeanty's super high on your board, I think you have to consider these things. But I think we have to manage the expectations. Like, we want so badly as a society, as a sports society, to make sweeping generalizations about positions. Don't pay running backs, got to make sure that if once you pay your quarterback, you can't win football games. To me, that's such a blind logic. Like, don't pay this running back is different than don't pay all running backs, right? Certain people will always be exceptions to these rules. And I just think we have to sort of manage that expectation a little bit different as a society. Like Jahmyr Gibbs, when he was drafted, is a perfect example of somebody that was destroyed. I mean, everybody destroyed that pick for 24 hours. And I'll give Field Yates credit when we were on the broadcast together at the time doing the draft. Field was like, actually, it's probably the best player available going to an offense that's really going to know how to use him. This feels dynamic. I think we need to just pull back on this concept of what does Saquon say about running backs, and just let Saquon say something about Saquon. Like, Derrick Henry is a far different situation than every other running back. I don't think nuance will anymore allow us to put everybody in one basket and say this is the rule for this position group.
Right. If you're telling me that all the other teams are going to get the Eagles offensive line and Jeff Stoutland as their offensive line coach, then yes, I would feel differently about paying them. Also, I want to make a correction that Jahmyr Gibbs was drafted 12th, not 11th. So I'm sorry for drastically overstating the spot at which he went off the board.
If you're the person that wants to comment to that for the correction, politely, kindly, respectfully kiss my butt. Like, anybody that has to come at you and be like, you missed it, but respectfully. I said respectfully. All right, so let's respectfully move on to some of the franchise tag action that did or didn't happen today. Now, we knew coming into this that the Chiefs were going to tag Trey Smith. That's $23.4 million. And obviously, we knew that T. Higgins, for the second year in a row, which is particularly rare, has been tagged. So those are the only two players that got tagged, and that's the lowest total since 1994. And I don't know, Jori, that feels like there's something to that. Like, the best of the best, the guys that everybody was really obsessed about, are not getting anywhere near the open market. And now you have to look around the rest of the best and ask, man, is there really a franchise saver? Like, I just think it recalibrates our expectations a little bit, because if you needed offensive line help, Trey Smith was your golden goose, right? And now you're frustrated you don't have access to him. If you need a number one, T. Higgins was your golden goose. You can't touch him. So the franchise tag is doing exactly what it needs to do, but it just keeps the two most transformative players off the open market.
Right. And I think also the guys who got tagged were at positions where there was more of a shortage of free agents. I think an element of quarterbacks not getting tagged is we have seen kind of an influx of how many guys are on the market at quarterback, as well as how many rookies came onto the scene last year and made an impact. And so it was pretty wild to only have two guys tagged. According to ESPN Stats and Info, that's the fewest number tagged since 1994, which I did some math, and that is 5 years before either the guys who were tagged were born. And over the past 5 years, we've had an average of 9.2 players tagged per year. So 2 versus 9, super different. But I think part of this probably speaks to the salary cap going up and teams having a little bit more money than they thought they could. Part of this speaks to the relative supply demand at certain positions. I also think it'll be really interesting, and I know we're going to get into this, of what does it mean to be tagged? How confident are you, Fitz, that T. Higgins is on the Bengals in 2025 because they tagged him?
That's the interesting, man, because is that enough, depending on where you're picking in the first round, and understanding that if you give somebody a deal, it can be matched, obviously, if you try and take somebody, and if you don't, then there's draft compensation that goes back for it. If you're picking mid-late first round, and you're looking around saying, hey, you know what? We can absorb the money from this. I don't know, do you really want to go into the draft and try and find a T. Higgins, or do you just want to go find your T. Higgins, especially if you're in win now mode? Like, that's not a cheap amount of money, obviously. $26.2 million, the average of the top 5 paid at the position, is where that comes from. But you got to feel like a team could, at this point, they could sign him. There could be a sign and trade. There has to be an aggressive offer out there from somebody that's looking around saying, we need a number one receiver. We need him right now.
But I would be shocked if there's not an aggressive offer out there and more aggressive offers coming, because as we talked about, the reason you get tagged is because of the relative supply at the position. Also, as we mentioned, the receiver is not just a position where the free agency class is kind of weak, but it's also a position where the draft class is not considered strong relative to other years. And so you do not have a lot of options if you're a team that needs a receiver. And I think part of it's win now mode. Part of it's also, oh, hey, we just saw 5 rookie quarterbacks jump onto the scene and have these great years, but not all of them had talent around them. How do we get them the talent that they need around them? And so even if you're not win now, if you don't want to ruin a guy's development, and I feel like I had so many conversations at the combine about how many quarterbacks development we ruin, I think that getting them the help that they need is really important.
That's such okay. So I've said for years, if you identify your guy and you think you've got the quarterback, you now have an obligation organizationally to surround him with everything you can to be 100% sure. Like the only thing that is hell in the NFL, it frankly to me, it isn't not having a quarterback. It's being unsure if you have a quarterback. That is hell in the NFL. So if you are sure you have your guy, then surround him with absolutely everything you possibly can, and that's where T. Higgins becomes even more interesting. Plus, if you're a team that's making an aggressive move, even if you have to give up a couple of first rounders to get T, what you got to understand is, particularly if you're not picking high this year, you're going to believe you're picking even lower next year, right? Like, so you got to believe at least that the picks you're going to be giving up are not going to be top 5 draft picks. They're not going to be top 10 draft picks if things go the way you think they should go. So certainly just thinking about the difference a number 1 makes to the entire room, it feels like somebody's got to come for him, but nobody came for him last year. So I don't know. Like, is there some, we've gone through this 2 years in a row. Like, does that change in some ways in your mind whether or not T. Higgins is going to be a Bengal next year?
I think the problem here is that we talked about this last week. Duke Tobin, the de facto general manager of the Cincinnati Bengals, both said that T is the most urgent priority because he was going to hit free agency if not tagged, that he does not want to be the leader of a team without T. Higgins. He wants T. Higgins there. And also that Jamar Chase is going to be the highest paid non-quarterback in the league. So that's 37, 38, 39. Could it be $40 million? I mean, I think Micah Parsons is going to want that in terms of being the highest paid non-quarterback in the league. I think you just have to ask yourself, how committed are the Bengals to getting both of these done in a timeline that keeps them from feeling the pressure of receiver-needy teams giving them crazy deals? And I think you also have to ask yourself, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins now have the same agent. T. Higgins traded agents to Jamar's agent. So is that agent going to play ball? Which deal does the agent want first? I mean, there are a lot of behind-the-scenes dynamics at play here that could complicate any deal in Cincinnati being done quickly, which I think we've seen by Jamar not practicing during training camp last year and them not really having much movement on a deal, and by T getting franchise tagged not once, but twice.
Now, you tell me if you have a different sense, but it feels like whatever T makes in a long-term deal, Jamar makes substantially more. Like, this to me isn't Jamar makes $1 more than T. Higgins and everybody's happy. Like, I don't think we're talking about the 2 best wide receivers in the NFL on the same team. I think we're talking about one of the absolute best wide receivers and then one of the really, really, really good wide receivers in the NFL. Like, T. Higgins deserves to be franchised. He'll be a number 1 wherever he goes. But is he really in the same conversation as Jamar? Like, to me, they've got to get T done just so that they can get that wiped out and they can start working on how much extra money goes to Jamar at this point, because he's got to make substantially more.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think there are people in the league who feel like if you do T, you might be resetting your own market for Jamar, not because you're going to give T the same amount of money as Jamar, but because if T gets more than what you think, then Jamar's going to get even more than T. And others who would say, get Jamar done. And then what money do you have left over for T, and does it work? Because Jamar's the guy you need first and foremost, even if not first in terms of a timing standpoint. So I think part of this comes down to the Bengals. Again, part of this comes down to they have the same agent. At what timelines is their agent willing to negotiate one against the other?
And it's got to be frustrating.
Or is it going to be
fans.
Together? Is it going to be one negotiation of here's what we do with the cap, we have X amount of money, and here's what goes to one player and here's what goes to the other. Okay, now it's all done at once.
I love the idea of the agent being like, while I've got you on the phone, let's go ahead and just knock both of these out back to back. All right, so from people tagged to somebody not tagged, I don't know if this is surprising, but we at least know the next domino on the quarterback market. Sam Darnold not tagged, but Tom Pelissero and others have reported. This is what Tom tweeted out, quote, "The sides are still trying to find a deal that works for both sides." So everybody today is saying Sam Darnold not tagged, but they're still working on a deal. Make that make sense for me, Jori. Like, if you're letting him walk to the open market, but you're still working on a deal. It seems like you want something that's more team friendly than the franchise tag. But if you want something that's more team friendly, like, what does that say about JJ? Like, there's a lot of elements to this. Like, I could have, if it was just a franchise tag, that I'm looking at it saying security blanket, that makes sense. You want to keep your guy. You want to keep him in your pocket. You want to make sure that everything's good with JJ. If you're trying to do something that makes sense for both sides, you're probably talking about something multi-year, and that gets a lot more confusing to me.
Yes, I think when you look at the quarterback franchise tag, $40 million, I don't know that the Vikings feel like, given how Sam Darnold ended his season, they are sure they want him to be their guy and thus will give him $40 million. I also think that the Vikings are weighing, well, are we 70% sure we want Sam Darnold against JJ McCarthy? Are we 60%? And if so, do you want to pay him, 60 over 2 as opposed to 40 over 1? Also, when do you think JJ is getting that opportunity? Because you don't want to be paying $40 million to your backup. There are a lot of musical chairs going on here. But I think, to me, the fact that they did not franchise tag him, if I'm JJ McCarthy, I'm excited about it because I'm saying, okay, they're not so committed to me not starting this year that they're willing to give a guy $40 million all hitting the cap this year. But if I'm everyone else in the Vikings, I'm still like, well, I'm asking Sam to say hey, once you get your deal out there, come back and give me a chance to counter. Do that for me because, oh, by the way, you're probably not getting a roster like what the Vikings can offer you if you play again this year. You're probably not getting a coach who's going to elevate you in the way that Kevin O'Connell did. And Sam Darnold, unlike some guys might say, oh, no, I can do it because they might have a naivete that every team is similar in terms of the level of resources they've given you. Sam Darnold has already lived through in his career what it is like to not have the resources, not have the coaching, and not have the environment around you. And so I think he's going to have to say, do I want to make my big money that I haven't made yet because he didn't get a big veteran deal? Or do I want to go in the place where I feel like I can most likely win, maybe bet on myself short term again, but also there's a lot of risk with that because from November to now, his cost fell. So I think that there are just a lot of moving parts here. But I think ultimately, Sam Darnold is going to make way more guaranteed money over the course of multi-years if he goes somewhere else, because there's just not a lot of options, whether you're the Giants or the Jets or the Raiders or even the Browns, although I don't think they're going to be the team that goes after him given their draft spot. Kind of like what we were talking about at receiver. This is not a good year to need a quarterback. This is a really weak quarterback class. There are two guys who people feel good about, no one who anyone feels great about. And at the free agent market, there's just not a lot of guys out there.
I just have it in my mind, if you're the Giants and the Raiders, how do you feel about being leveraged again? Because they just went through this with Matt Stafford, where they put together huge offers for Stafford. You know, according to some people, the Giants felt like everything was basically done, and then Stafford decided not to come. According to some people, the Raiders felt really good about it, felt like they had Stafford, everything they could possibly want, and then the deal doesn't get done. If you're these quarterback-needy teams, how many times are you going to go back to the negotiating table, negotiate something, and then watch the quarterback take it back to the team that they've been at and be like, "Nah, I'm good." Because the point you make is a really important one. The Giants and the Raiders suck. If we're just being honest, they're not good rosters today. So if you're Sam Darnold and you can get anywhere near comparable money to stay in Minnesota, that would make a hell of a lot more sense just from the personal. Even if you don't know if you're starting, at least you know you're going to have a competent coach and a competent opportunity to start. They've given you that. So otherwise, you're going somewhere where if everything breaks right, you might be the third best quarterback on the third best team in your own division. That's a much different beast than what we're talking about. So I wonder how long the Giants, the Raiders, the Jets, any of these teams are really going to want to continue to sit down and talk to people only to find out that they're being used, essentially, it feels like, for leverage to get them more money where they already are.
I think you're acting like they have a leverage and a sense of luxury that they don't have. They need a quarterback. It doesn't matter how many people are using them. Also, they're all going to be using people for other positions and already have during their hiring cycles and at other places. I think, to me, what I would ask you is, if you're Sam Darnold and you can get, let's say, 1 year, $30 million in guaranteed from the Vikings with a possible second year, but not guaranteed, kind of like the Daniel Jones contract we saw where he had 40 guaranteed for 2 years, but nothing after. Like the other 2 years could be completely voided if they wanted to, which they did. Would you rather that or 2 years, 50 with the Raiders?
I would take the Vikings. I've already made $65-ish million according to the World Wide Web. in my career. So I've already made I've already made enough money that my entire family tree is impacted by it. So now it becomes partially about money, but also partially about where can I continue, especially when I've had so many miserable years with so many different teams. I've floated from team to team to team. I finally have a coach and a coaching staff that gets me. I want to play there. If we're talking about insane difference in money, if we're talking about 1 year $25 or $25 million for the Vikings versus 2 years $80 million for the Raiders, I understand why he would take the 2 years $80 million. But if you're talking anywhere near comparable for the two in money, to me, you stay where you know. You stay where you're comfortable. The devil you know versus the devil you don't. If I'm Sam Darnold, it's going to take a lot to pry me away to go to an organization that's in dysfunction. Now, if, for example, the Pittsburgh Steelers call me, that's a much different situation. I don't view the Steelers as being dysfunctional. I view the Steelers as being well run and stable year in and year out. I think players view the Steelers overall as being a stable atmosphere. So if you tell me that I'm going to a place that has a coach I believe is there for the long haul with an organization that's run intelligently, and I feel like there's a chance we can win a bunch of football games, then yeah, like-minded, I'll go. But if you're telling me that I got to go to one of these teams that absolutely sucks and is in the beginning of a rebuild, not a chance I'm doing it.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. I think the other question you have to ask is, what if you're guaranteed to start versus you'll maybe start if JJ's not healthy?
I'm going to believe that I got my chance last year. I won that job last year. I was going to start anyway going into that last year. Competitor in me is going to believe that I can hold him off for another year, I think. Here's what I know. I don't want to go start somewhere where the offensive line is bad and I don't have a lot of weapons. And I'm describing many of these bad teams. Like you can make an argument that there's a weapon for the Giants and a weapon for the Raiders and maybe a weapon for the Jets. But you can't make an argument there's much else around them, right? So what good does starting do if I'm going to go start somewhere and just get the snot beat out of me every week and not be very good?
Yeah, no, I think you make a good point. And the other thing I think we should consider is while Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the Vikings general manager, had already left San Francisco when they traded up to get Trey Lance at 3rd overall, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah did watch his former employer, his former colleagues, trade up and use a lot of draft capital to go get that 3rd pick for Trey Lance, and then it not work out, and them say, you know what, we're rolling with Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, and we're not going to keep trying to develop Trey really and give him that opportunity just because we have that sunk cost of the draft pick. And so I think it'll be interesting to see whether that transfers to JJ McCarthy. If Sam Darnold ends up coming back and having another good year, do you trade JJ McCarthy? Do you have him as an asset? Or do you try and say, well, if you look across the division, there's actually a guy who sat for 3 years behind another veteran and it worked out really well for him. And we believe in their quarterback development and our own. Maybe you have Sam Darnold play another year or two and JJ McCarthy after like Jordan Love. You don't get the same value on your draft pick, but I think the Packers are pretty happy with how it's worked out.
Yeah, well, let's see how this plays. Once the legal tampering window opens up, it's going to be mad chaos for Sam Darnold because we're going to end up with 5 teams that need a quarterback, and they're all going to turn around and say, hey, we'll make you an offer. Like he's going to be sitting at a Thanksgiving table. Unfortunately for him, all of the meals he's being presented are likely to suck. I'm just saying, they're likely to suck. Okay, let's get to one other contract that's out there, and this one you knew was coming. We've talked about it. Osa Digizua, not tagged, reaches an $80 million, I should say, contract. 4 years, $80 million. You saw this coming, so I know you weren't surprised by it particularly.
Yeah, I think the timing of it is really good for the Cowboys, actually, because they had considered placing the franchise tag on Osa if they did not reach this deal. They get to a 4-year, $80 million, $52 million guaranteed. And this is team-friendly would be a strong way to describe this deal and probably a little unfair to Osa and his agent. But I do think that this is a deal the Cowboys should feel really good about because when you look at what a franchise tag was going to cost, what a second franchise tag would have cost, and also just all the cap space they would have taken out, there were people around the league at the Combine telling me they thought that Osa would get at least $22 million, and if he had hit the open market, could command $27 million. Well, now the Cowboys are locking him up long-term for $20 million a year. He's still getting good money. He's still there for a long time, and he's getting multi-year guarantees, but this is not a break-the-bank deal, and so when you get to the other elements of the roster that the Cowboys still need to work on, and we're going to get to that in our winners and losers section, so I'm not going to spoil it for our listeners who have to stick around. let's just say it's a good year to have cap flexibility and money left to give to other player or players.
Yeah, let's get to winners and losers. We're going to take a quick break and then give you the winners and losers from all of the chaos we've seen so far in free agency. Oh, it's time to give out prizes, winners and losers. I'm not sure if we're sending ribbons, but we should. One winner, obviously, we've already sort of covered it. J.J. McCarthy. I mean, whatever happens with Sam Darnold, I think the Vikings made a big statement. So there's a winner for you. But Jori, I know let's take a look at the positive first. I'm going to be positive for the day. So let's look at some of the more positive winners that came out of the news today. Give me somebody that's on your mind.
I think one of the key winners, and I alluded to this already, is Micah Parsons. And I'll give you 3 reasons. The first being that the Cowboys for a long time, as we've talked about on this show, have struggled to find good defensive tackles. They've struggled to find someone to clog up the middle of the lanes, to clog up the interior, and just really star at defensive tackle. They've had really rough run defenses quite a few years in this era of their play. And Osa is that, and they locked him up. So if you're Micah and you're trying to rush the passer and you're trying to disrupt, well, you want someone who's staying back to clog the lanes so that you can rush upfield, and that's what Micah's going to be able to do. The second is they've got some more cap space. So the more cap space they have, the more they can give to Micah in a signing bonus if they can get him done this offseason, which I think both sides would probably prefer to do, assuming that the number is right. And the third is that, as mentioned, Osa did not sign for like a top of market deal. He signed a good deal, and I think it was a fair deal to him and the team, but he didn't break the bank. And so you need someone to not break the bank if you want Micah to, or if Micah wants to break the bank, which I think he does. So money left over, cap flexibility this year, and a great defender along who you can play. And oh, by the way, if for some reason Cowboys and Micah can't get that deal done this year, well, Micah's numbers are probably going to look pretty good if someone like Osa is helping clear the way and take care of things around him so he can go get those sacks.
Yeah, I will remind everybody, if it's the first time you're listening to the show, it's important to note the salary cap came in higher than anyone expected, including teams with their own private models of where they thought the salary cap would be. So when Jori mentions repeatedly that, the salary cap gave us a little extra bump, we need to remember that that's not just us sitting in front of microphones. Everybody that got that information was like, oh, holy cow. And as a result, you're seeing some of that in the spending that teams are able to do right now. So huge win for Micah Parsons. And it makes sense. I will just remind Cowboys fans that you better start watching the draft because you're re-signing the guys that you want to re-sign. But the issue of depth on that roster is not going to change unless you start hitting home runs every single time in the draft. You're going to have to make the most of the cheap labor that you can if you're going to pay top dollar for so many other people on the roster, which is what the Cowboys are doing right now. Also a winner. I mean, Joe Burrow has to be a winner, right? Like T. Higgins franchised. It feels like Joe's made it clear he wants everybody back. He's got to be smoking a cigar today, right?
I'm putting an asterisk on Joe Burrow being a winner.
Okay.
I think he's a winner in the sense that T. Higgins is not able to go anywhere with no strings attached because he has that franchise tag, a second straight franchise tag. But if the Bengals and T. Higgins were really committed to each other, they'd have figured out a long-term deal. They would figure it out pretty quickly because right now it's not unviable for a team to give the Bengals a great offer and convince them to tag and trade. And, oh, by the way, someone else might want to give them the deal and the money and the multi-year guarantees that the Bengals have not yet given T. So if I'm Joe Burrow, I'm glad, but I'm still a little nervous. And I'm saying, why aren't we locking him up for multi-years when a trade becomes a lot less palatable to other teams?
Yeah, that's fair. And, we'll put him on winners and losers today as a winner. If T ends up getting seduced to go elsewhere, then we will put Joe Burrow on the losers. We will then change with the new information. Put him. Give me somebody else that stands out to you as a winner.
The Bears getting another offensive lineman. I mean, last year, the Bears have Caleb Williams coming in, and they say, okay, we're going to get him 3 fantastic receivers. He'll have people to throw to. But I remember going to the Bears during camp, and they were having a center battle at the time, and there were a couple questions on that offensive line. And I was like, a center battle with a rookie quarterback? You really do not want that. And I think that they were so deep on the skill players that they forgot to give the guy protection. And I think any quarterback needs a protection, especially a young quarterback, and especially a young quarterback who really likes to hold the ball longer than he probably should and sometimes needs to just get away and stop trying to hit the home run. That's what Caleb Williams is. And so when you get Jonah Jackson from the Rams, that allows you to feel better about the protection Caleb Williams has.
Yeah, I love that call. And Look, we all knew it coming into this. They're going to need to address the offensive line. It's a good moment for the Bears, and I'm trying not to do what I did last year. Last year, I was all in on the Bears making this massive leap. I'm trying to be more patient this year and not just sit there and think, man, they got the best coach in the cycle, and now they're taking care of offensive line. It just feels like they're doing smart things for the organization. Smart teams do this.
Yeah, and the other thing worth noting about Jonah Jackson is that before he played guard for the Rams last year, he was 4 years with the Lions, and that's where he started. Let's see, it would be 57 games for the Lions. He started at left guard. And so when you think about Ben Johnson, one of the biggest questions I had about Ben Johnson as head coach of the Chicago Bears is, does your brilliant scheme actually work if you don't have the offensive line giving your quarterback time and your running back lanes? Well, now not only does he have a stronger offensive lineman, he also has one that worked with him for several years in Detroit. And so he understands how to set the tone in that line and how to probably install the same scheme that he's already played in.
Yeah, I love that call by you. And always keep an eye on new coaches and bringing in people they know, because there's just familiarity. Like, it's just even teaching concepts to other players that they're working with, like knowing the expectations of how a dude works and knowing what he's expecting from certain plays. Like, it's massive. All right, that's the good. Now I get to be womp womp Debbie Downer. The losers through all of this so far. Give me a good loser off the top of your head.
Yeah, I would say one of my losers would be people who love suspense, because if you love that July 15th deadline and are they going to get a deal done, or is someone going to report to training camp after the franchise tag and they're mad, and is Saquon Barkley going to go from $10 million to $1 more million so that he can come back to camp? You have 2 chances at that rather than 9 chances at that this year, because almost nobody got the franchise tag.
I'll go one bigger when you talk about suspense lovers losing. Like, now that you've taken some of these free agents out, now that Matt Stafford, that domino has fallen, it does not feel to me right now, Jori, like this free agent class. I know I've said this about the draft too. It doesn't feel like this is a free agent class of franchise savers. Like, there are pieces in this free agent class that I'm sure are going to be great depending on where they end up, and you might get a year or two out of somebody here or there. But if your favorite team stinks and your concept was like the Patriots got more money than they know what to do with. Okay, for what? Like, I mean, you got all this money, but it doesn't mean that there are the right pieces out there to go spend that money on. Like, this is a bad draft to have the first overall pick, in my opinion. It's a bad year to have the most money available, in my opinion. Like, if you're looking for quick fixes, none of them exist. I think what you should be looking for right now as a fan is for your team to spend the money as judiciously as possible so that they have more money when they need more money. If you got somebody on your roster worth investing in, go invest in that guy. Go invest in the devil you know, again, because I'm looking around this free agent market, and as a fan of a team that sucks, I don't think that there's a lifeboat out here for me. For Patriots and Browns and Titans and Raiders and Jets and Giants and all these terrible football teams from last year, if you're into the suspense of, oh my God, who's going to save my team in a week? I don't think the names are going to be there. I think everybody's going to be wholly underwhelmed by the transactions that come in a week. But you should still listen to the show next week, by the way.
Right. And it's not just a lifeline for fans. It's a lifeline for like talk show hosts. I mean, you and I have like an hour we got to do this for these people who are trying to fill TV time every single day, ESPN, NFL Network. There is not going to be the same caliber of play. I mean, I guess we'll still have some quarterbacks who could land if Aaron Rodgers goes somewhere, if he retires. That's definitely one of the biggest questions left. But the NFL seems to have forgotten that they should write a script for the offseason too, because instead we have like actual good football moves being made, which is to say that people aren't overpaying, which I always kind of disagree with as a term, because if you want the guy and you have to pay the market, it's not necessarily overpaying. That's another story, but it might be more cost efficient spring than the NFL is used to, and a less buzzy, great to talk about spring.
Yeah, free agent frenzy when it's aired next week on all of the 24-hour networks is going to be just a lot of Aaron Rodgers and Sam Darnold talk, and they're hoping to hell that they both get, like, the worst case scenario for everybody in that world is Aaron Rodgers retires and Sam Darnold goes back to the Vikings before we even get there. Then we're not talking about anything. All right, give me another loser out of this for you.
The Jets' next quarterback. I don't know who he is. I don't know where he's coming from, but he just lost Davante Adams. Yes, this was expected in terms of how much cap space they could save. Also, I mean, quite frankly, the Jets were a loser generally because they traded a third-round pick for Davante Adams to play for half a season, not make it to the playoffs, not have much of an impact other than a game or two that looked great with Aaron Rodgers, and now he's gone. You still don't have the receiver help. You got rid of Rodgers, and you just have a lot of question marks.
That trade now looks really bad for the Jets. I mean, to give up anything and then have to deal with that contract on the books, that's not an ideal situation for Davante. Do you think, like, all of the speculation people want on Twitter is that Davante gets cut and then wherever Aaron Rodgers ends up, Davante then goes there? Like, are we trying to turn this into a buddy cop movie forever for any good reason? At this point, it's hard to figure out where Davante actually wants to go and what he wants next in his career.
Yeah, I mean, if you could play with your best friend who you know will throw you the ball more than another quarterback is likely to, not because you're not good, but because your friend really likes throwing you the ball, why not? If he believes Aaron Rodgers has something in the tank, and I trust Aaron Rodgers, who has a lot of power in this league, will at least ask for Davante. Now, is he going to get Davante and Alan Lazard and David Bakhtiari and a couple other friends as the Jets allowed him to do? I don't know that he's going to get that much level of power again. He's probably not getting Nathaniel Hackett again, which is probably good for Aaron, Nathaniel, and whatever team Aaron goes to if he goes to another team. But I do think that Davante is not an unlikely option. And you also have to look of, okay, if he's already getting paid by another team, well, he might not even be that expensive.
I continue to hammer I don't know why I got no reporting on this. It just makes sense. Aaron Rodgers to the Titans. I'm telling you, just in my mind, it makes sense. He can go to a team that doesn't really care what he does in media. He can go to an area of the country that doesn't really care what he has to say about any of it. He can be weird Aaron, and it won't really matter in Nashville. Like, it feels, and then he goes to a situation where they need to get a lot better at that position right now. So I don't know. I keep making it make sense in my mind. Aaron Rodgers to the Titans. When that happens, we will clip off every time I've said it, and I will then take the mantle as the ultimate insider. That's my hope.
The other thing I'll ask you, Fitz, is if I were to tell you which trade went better, Amari Cooper to the Bills or Davante Adams to the Jets, which happened around the same time, similar compensation, all of that, without looking at the numbers, who do you think did better?
I think Davante, because Amari was so hurt. Amari was out for a lot of that. And Amari really felt like Amari only had like one good game in that process, and then was battling injury. The Amari trade also felt wildly disappointing to me. I really thought it was going to take the Bills over the top. Am I right? Davante was better than Amari?
No, statistically, you're right that he was way better than Amari. And before I get to what Davante did, yes, there was an injury level, but it's interesting because the Bills got very little out of Amari and still went far in the playoffs. Maybe not as far as they want to, but they still had a great season. Josh Allen won MVP. They just did it in spite of Amari's production. The Jets got production out of Davante Adams, and they didn't go anywhere. So when I look at it, they got traded at a similar time. Yes, Amari missed a few games due to health, but Amari had 20 catches for 297 yards and 2 touchdowns. So that's under 300 yards, 2 touchdowns. Davante had 114 catches for 854 yards and 7 touchdowns. So he still went over 1,000 yards in 2024 between the two teams. I think we kind of forget that because the Jets were so bad. 1,063 yards and 8 touchdowns. I'm not saying the Jets should pay him what they were going to pay him, but when you think about the market for him, whether it's the Patriots and having a reunion between him and Josh McDaniel and, you can go play with Drake May, or it's reuniting with Aaron Rodgers, the kid's still got something left in the tank if you're looking at the stats.
Yeah, 100%. And by the way, look at what he did during his time in Vegas with terrible quarterback play. I mean, he had Derek Carr for 1 year, and then after that, completely went off the rails. Like, I still think Davante feels like one of those guys that's going to end up going somewhere next year. We're like, oh, what a massive difference he makes. Why do I feel like Davante's going to end up a Chief now that I've said that? I feel like somehow, some way, Davante ends up a Chief and then wins the Super Bowl, and that's my personal
It's funny you say that because right as you said he's going to go somewhere, we're not going to expect it. I was thinking about DeAndre Hopkins going to the Chiefs, but he wasn't at the same caliber. I mean, 437 yards, 4 touchdowns in 10 games. Like, I think Davante should go to the Patriots, and I think the Patriots would be wise to go after him. Maybe he's got to smooth over some things with Josh McDaniel, but they do understand each other well. It's probably one of the best quarterback situations he can land himself in. And I think the Patriots are probably a better roster than they played last year. I think they'll be able to get their defense where they need to go under Mike Vrabel. Drake May will have a second year. I would imagine they'll upgrade their offensive line. They have the cap space to do to do so and a clear need. So I think that Davante could do a lot worse than going to the Patriots.
By the way, in general, wide receiver needy teams seem to be losers on this now that we've got Deebo headed to Washington. San Francisco gets 5th round pick, and it has us all wondering what's going to happen with Ayuk next. Like, is San Francisco in a bit of a rebuild here?
It's a good question. I think part of this is also, what are they going to do with Brock Purdy? How much are they paying him? George Kittle's getting older. I think that they need to decide who they want to be. And it's funny. Someone said last week with Sean McVay and the Stafford information that maybe Sean just got bored. Like sometimes Sean just needs to mix things up. I think that would probably be a little bit overstating it with Kyle Shanahan, but I am curious how much of this is Kyle doesn't believe in the team, or it's a lot of money, or is it just, hey, every once in a while you got to mix things up, stay fresh, keep up with the league. You can't always have your guys. Oh, Brandon Ayuk also got hurt, but I think rebuild would be a strong statement because I think had they not had the just absolute like terror of injuries that they had last year, they still would have been one of the better teams in the NFC.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just think that when you start basically peeling off talent all over the place, it puts a lot on your coach. This is where John Lynch and Shanahan together, they got a lot on their shoulders. Like they have a reputation that they've earned of being able to consistently have a winning team. Now they're going to have to pay their quarterback, and at the same time that they're paying their quarterback, they're getting rid of talent all over the place. They're getting older at some key positions. I just think that this is a true, put up or shut up sort of moment for Shanahan and John Lynch moving forward. All right. We got some combine news and notes to break down. Jori was there, obviously, last week. We talked a lot about it, but there's a couple of headlines still making news, trying to figure out how real they are and what the actual sort of takeaway is from it. We'll break that down when we come back. All right, Jori, we already talked a little bit about running backs in the combine. I do want to ask you, because as much as we talked about, obviously, everybody's got their eyes on Ashton Jeanty. There's some buzz for Amari and Hampton, the running back out of North Carolina, to be a higher draft pick. Were you hearing that in Carolina? Were you hearing that in Indy? Is there something real to Ashton Jeanty sort of being surpassed by other running backs?
Yeah, I don't think this is a question of, is Ashton Jeanty a great running back and should he be one of the top ones off the board? I think the question is, he's great, but is he by far the best, or could another team go for someone else? And I think after Amari and Hampton's great combine performance, there were some people saying, he looked really good. He played against a different caliber of competition at North Carolina than Jeanty did at Boise State. By the way, they have different sizes. And so I had one evaluator say that they would take Hampton first, and an evaluator from another team who told me that they felt like it was kind of like a, what flavor do you want? It wasn't that one of them was clearly better than the other. It was instead that, hey, if you want the bigger kind of bruiser back, you get one. If you want the more elusive one, you get the other.
Yeah, and this is where I will loudly say for everybody, this doesn't have to be about what's wrong with Ashton Jeanty. It can be about what's right with Hampton and the rise that he's getting now, because people are really diving into all of it. So want to give Hampton some credit there. Also, Jalen Milroe, one of the more interesting. Look, I spent a little time with him at the Super Bowl. And, as we get to interview people at the Super Bowl, as they walk away, oftentimes with the rookies, I immediately think, how's that guy going to do in interviews next year? And certain guys have it. Boy, you spend 10 minutes talking to Jalen Milroe, and you're like, yep, he's going to thrive in interviews. Like he's got, there's a focus, there's a clarity to the way he puts his point across. Like he's obviously polished and smart and ready to go on these things. And as he walked away from me at the Super Bowl, I thought, man, he's going to impress. And what do you know? Now we hear stories out of the combine that, Jalen Milroe really impressed a lot of people. I'm not talking about his film. I'm just talking about they get that 15 minutes in the room, and it seems like he's really helped himself with those 15 minutes that he got with different teams.
Yeah, I agree with you. I talked to Jalen Milroe at the Senior Bowl and was super impressed by the humility, which is not the case with necessarily every quarterback in this class, and really just thought he understood what it took. He understood the work ethic he's going to need to improve. And what's interesting to me is that when you look at where Jalen Milroe is at now, the athleticism is off the charts. I mean, I had someone tell me that they believed that Jalen Milroe's athleticism is better than Anthony Richardson's. Now remember, Anthony Richardson was drafted 4th overall by the Indianapolis Colts. The problem is they don't believe he's ready as a passer. And so then you have to ask yourself, are you drafting a guy for a passing role? Are you drafting a guy for an athletic role? And what is he doing at the beginning? And are you drafting more in mind of what can you do in 2025 or what can you do over the span of 3, 5, 7 years? And so I had a NFC executive I was talking to who told me that they remembered when teams were interviewing Jalen Hurts in the combine. And Jalen Hurts was obviously an extremely athletic prospect coming out, although he was a more developed passer and a more accomplished passer than Jalen Milroe is at this point. But someone asked Jalen Hurts, would you be open to playing other roles while we develop you as a passer? And according to this executive, Jalen said, I'm a quarterback. Now, Jalen Hurts is a quarterback. He's a Super Bowl MVP winning cornerback. I'm not doubting that. But I think when you get to Jalen Milroe, who maybe has a little more rawness as a passer, there are teams who are saying, hey, if you're willing to give me 12 snaps a game at a mix of some sort of wildcat package, punt return, etc., different things that you can do, I'm committed to developing you in the quarterback room. So you'll still be in the quarterback room in terms of meetings. I'll still work with you to become the passer that you want to be. Because by the way, if you can become a great passer and a great quarterback, or even a good passer and a great quarterback because your athleticism is buoying you, that's a win for you. But I need you to agree that you're going to help me out on that other front. And the executive had a great quote when they talked about not rushing that development, which is that quote, it's just like if you're cooking a certain meal, you can't rush it. Too many times people are like, I know I'm supposed to make this at 350 degrees, but I'm turning it up to 450. When the executive told me this, I felt super seen because I absolutely like to ramp things up to 405 no matter what I'm cooking because it is time for that food to be ready.
Don't do it. Don't do it, Jori. You got to be patient. You got to let it cook. You got to let it cook the right way. It doesn't taste the same, Jori. You got to have a little patience.
Let Jalen Milroe cook. Let everybody cook.
But I will say to that end, I know I've been hard on quarterbacks in this draft. I've consistently through the College Football Power Hour, on this show, on every radio interview I do, I'm hard on quarterbacks in this year's draft. I believe I believe most of these quarterbacks can actually really be successful if they're drafted somewhere where they're asked not to play for a year or two and they get to develop into the best version of themselves. Like, I think if you look at the fatal flaws on tape for Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart, Jalen Milroe, Quinn Ewers, go up and down the list, they've all got a list of fatal flaws. Now, if you took the time to work those out in a world where there's not the same level of eyeballs and pressure and you can bring that quarterback along slowly, like, I think they'd all have a shot. My fear with whoever gets drafted, if we are in a world where Cam and Shedeur and guys like that get drafted in the top half of the first round, if that ends up happening, the expectation, right or wrong, the expectations in the timeline change. I wish I could change that, but I can't, right? So to me, if you're talking about Jalen or Jackson or Shedeur or Cam, and you're telling me, yeah, they actually end up going to an organization where they're not asked to start right away. They get a couple of years to figure it out. They develop slowly, and they come along and they become the best version of themselves. I would say a lot of these guys can be really good quarterbacks. I fear that that's not the situation we're going to end up in. If Jalen Milroe gets drafted somewhere where he's not asked to play year one, I would at that point throw confetti up if I were Jalen because it gives him a real opportunity to make it in the league.
I completely agree, Fitz, and I think that there's a case to be made that you are better off as a quarterback if you are getting drafted back half of the first round into the second and having that opportunity. I understand that there is a financial implication to getting drafted earlier, and I understand some of the factors in terms of general manager and head coach buy-in, but I just think we see so many top of the first round quarterbacks fail because they're not given the time, they're not given the structure to succeed. There's too much pressure on them. And what I would say to people who look at last year and say, well, Jaden Daniels was more ready than we thought. Well, Bo Nix was more ready than we thought. Michael Penix might have been ready by the end of the year. I think there's a case that just like Saquon Barkley is an outlier, not a trend, last year's quarterback class was an outlier, not a trend. It felt crazy at the time how many guys were drafted in the first 12. That's 6 guys drafted in 12 spots. But some of this is between NIL and COVID and different factors in the college game. We just had a lot of the guys who are talented and ready to play come out in the same year. We do not have that this year. So I don't think that we should get too ahead of ourselves saying that because all these first round rookies were ready last year, that means we should get more guys in the first round this year. And to the contrary, I think that the teams, when I'm talking to them, are saying, look, passer alone, Some people think Jalen Milroe is like third, fourth round on the passing level. Athleticism, first round. So the range I was getting for him was late first, and then some people were saying mid to late second. Well, that makes perfect sense because Lamar Jackson was drafted 32nd with a similar level of athleticism and slightly better passing. And Jalen Hurts was drafted in the 50s with, again, similar athleticism, though you could argue who is more athletic between them, and Jalen was a slightly better passer. And so also, if you're Jalen Milroe and you get drafted in that range, look at where Lamar is at. MVP of the league twice already. Look at where Jalen Hurts is at. 2 Super Bowl appearances, a Super Bowl title, and a Super Bowl MVP. Good things can happen to quarterbacks drafted late in the first round and into the second.
Yeah, I love that point. And I'll reiterate again, it's the expectation change that I think is so wild. And look, a year ago right now, as we were doing this show, we were saying that there was no chance that any of those top 3 teams were going to trade out. We were saying that on the show because everybody had a good sense that Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, by the time we got to the draft, J.J. McCarthy, even Bo Nix, by the time we got, there was a presumption that most of these quarterbacks were just different. And this year's class needs a little bit more development. I don't think that's a bad thing. I just think you got to be aware of it and give it to them. Speaking of development, can't talk about combine takeaways in the draft without at least checking in on Travis Hunter, because I think it's important. Everybody keeps trying to figure out, is he a wide receiver or a corner? And Jori, his value changes drastically depending on where teams see him in this situation. I think that's the part we keep not talking about. We keep talking about whether he's a wide receiver or corner, but whether he's a wide receiver or corner to each individual team drastically changes how they may view where to draft him.
I definitely think that's the case. And I think what's fascinating about this is that you might say either you could play 2 positions or you can't. In which case, either you could play receiver and DB or you can only play 1. But teams don't actually view it as that straightforward. There are definitely people in the league who say, if you want to validate drafting him super highly, top 5, top 10, have him play both ways, because that's how you're going to get the value out of a unique athlete who a lot of evaluators are saying, we've never seen someone this good at multiple positions. But then there are some people who say, well, at the NFL level, what you need to do from a playbook standpoint, from a game film standpoint, from an advanced scouting standpoint, learning 2 different game plans is just too difficult. This is not Micah Parsons playing linebacker and defensive line, or Zach Bond moving on and off the line of scrimmage. This is 2 different game plans that you're working with, which brings others to say, though, it's not necessarily equal to play mostly receiver and DB as it is to play mostly DB and receiver, because on offense, you are attacking. So you could be the 3rd or 4th receiver, have a package put in, and because you're attacking, even if it's predictable because you don't have time to learn all of the disguises, you're the attacker, you can still have that level of success. But if you're a defender and you're trying to be some sort of nickel package, but you don't understand the defense around you, the offense is going to attack you and it's going to become probably more of a problem than a good thing. So I had some teams who say, I would just put him at the position that I most need. Others who felt like they would put him at primarily DB with receiver packages, and others who say he is a good enough receiver and receiver is a more valuable position that I'm just playing him at receiver. So there's a wide range of potential usages for Travis Hunter. And what's fascinating to me is not only that there are so many opinions, but also that there are so many opinions that have nothing to do with what he's actually good at, because he's good enough at both that some of this is going to be circumstantial.
I feel like it comes back to the what flavor are you in? Like, if Travis Hunter is not the first pick in the draft, it doesn't necessarily mean that Travis Hunter isn't the most talented player in the draft. I think it's this particular player is going to come down so much to what's my scheme, what's my structure, who are my coaches, and can I get the best out of where I think he fits the best. And that can be wildly different, So that's why I'm genuinely curious, because if you told me that Hunter was going to be the first pick by the Titans, I would have no problem with that. Clearly, I have no problem with Travis Hunter being the first pick in the draft. I think he has the talent that has earned that. But I also don't have a problem with the Titans looking around and saying, couldn't really agree on how to use him. We thought Abdul Carter was an easier pick for us, a more down the middle pick, right? Like I do think that it can make sense to look around and say, hey, we see him primarily as a wide receiver and we don't want to spend that equity there, or we don't need that, or we see him primarily as a corner and that's not where we want to spend our first overall draft. Like, these are variables we're not used to. It's not as simple as we love the player, he's number 1 on our board and we select him.
And you also have to remember that while the pro is getting him to play both ways, and I think fitness-wise, he is capable of doing that. And by the way, to be perfectly clear, I don't think he's a dumb player. I don't think anyone in the world is dumb. I think it's an unhelpful, helpful framework. And I don't think he's incapable of learning something. I just think that the way NFL is structured, it's like saying, I want you to be enrolled in 2 classes at the same time and take the final exam in them, even though clearly because of the laws of physics and the space-time continuum, you cannot be sitting in both of them at the same time. So you're going to be constantly missing something. And I just don't think that people believe it is possible to miss that much and have success at the NFL level. But I think when you look at it, if he goes to the Titans, well, if I'm Brian Callahan and I'm calling plays on offense, I think I want him on my side. And again, he's probably not going to the Patriots, but if I'm Mike Vrabel and I'm on defense, I probably want him as a DB. So I think there are just so many different factors here.
Yeah, and I think your analogy on learning is important. I also think that even if the team believes day one that he can do both, if a team believes day one he can do both and they draft him for that, they have to, in the back of their minds, have to have a backup plan for what if he can't. What if it is too much of a lift? So what are you doing if you're only, like, you might be drafting for 2, you're hoping for 2, but if you only get 1 position out of him, will it be worth that pick where you had him, the 1 spot you know you have to use him? So I think teams have to have a contingency plan.
I talked to one NFC assistant coach who told me that the benefit is, you might be able to fill 2 gaps on your roster. But the risk of that is if you're relying on him to fill 2 spots, if he gets hurt, now you need to replace him with 2 players. So I think we should be realistic about that. On the other side, I talked to an AFC evaluator and I said, if you were drafting Travis Hunter, how would you go about this? And they said, I'd give him the full defensive playbook when he got here. And I would give him about 20 plays. So again, that equivalent to the 4th receiver playbook on offense. And I would say, you're going to keep working with the DBs, but I'm giving you this little package. And if over time you master the package, then I'll give you a little bit more. And then I'll give you a little bit more. So I'm not giving you the full receiver 1 playbook. I'm not giving it to you in that degree of depth, but I am going to try to incentivize you that because you enjoy playing multiple positions and have the skill set to do so physically at a high level, I will give you benchmarks that allow you to come along more slowly on offense and have that ability to slowly but surely work your way in if you continue to show progress.
And just a reminder, systems matter, coaching matters, because I think he has the chance to be the most interesting prospect we've ever seen drafted. It's just going to be a matter of where he goes. Can they maximize every ounce of what he's capable of? Is the juice going to be worth the squeeze? And that's going to be interesting to see. What I know is we'll keep breaking it down. Obviously, this is a massive week in the NFL, so we'll be back on Friday with C-Rob and with Jori. I think we're double dipping on insiders on Friday. I think. I don't know. Next Friday we're double dipping on it. Okay,
we're not.
The C-Rob and Frank. Okay, fine. Then we're back to contentious, feisty Fridays. That's even better because then they can fight. We'll let them fight as we continue to get ready for free agency. In the meantime, follow us on social media at Jori Epstein, at Jason Fitz. You guys know this. Rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends, family, and enemies, and everybody to hang out with us. We appreciate you for listening. We will be back on Friday with more inside coverage.